Every night, she'd bury her face into my shoulder and cry. No words, no explanations, just silent sobs that soaked my shirt. I thought I was being her rock, the man who held her through life's storms. I never asked questions, because I believed the pain wasn't mine to interrogate. I held her because I loved her, because I thought that's what love was, presence, not pressure. But now I know. Now I know those tears weren't mine to hold. They belonged to someone else. They always did. And the night I found out the truth, I didn't cry. I just stared at her, lying beside me like a stranger I'd never met, and whispered, "You could have just told me." She never told me where the tears came from, and for a long time, I never asked. I thought marriage was about patience, about letting the other person fall apart in your arms if they needed to, without pushing them for reasons. I thought I was being good, maybe even noble, by not asking. The first time she cried like that, I remember we had just gotten home from dinner with her parents. She said something about being tired, and as soon as we got in bed, she crumbled into me like a sandcastle meeting the tide. I wrapped my arms around her, stroked her hair, whispered nothing in particular. And she sobbed. That night, I assumed it was family pressure or maybe work stress. She was in marketing at the time, and her company had just merged. I kissed the top of her head and told her she didn't have to carry everything alone. She didn't respond. After that, it became more frequent. Some nights, it was just trembling. Some nights, it was tears that turned into quiet sleep. But never words. And I got used to it. That's the scary part. I got used to her breaking in my arms. There's something quietly soul-killing about thinking you're comforting someone, only to realize later that they were grieving a life you weren't part of. Back then, I didn't know what that silence meant. I do now. Looking back, I see the signs. Little things that made no noise but screamed in hindsight. Like how she always kept her phone screen facing down, or how she started locking the bathroom door during showers when she never used to. How she began staying late at work more often, blaming last-minute meetings or client emergencies. I remember one night in particular. She came home past 11 p.m. Her mascara was smudged, her hair messy, not in the sexy, wind-blown way, but like she'd been somewhere she shouldn't have been. I asked her lightly, "Tough meeting?" She nodded without looking at me, walked straight to the bedroom, and cried harder than usual that night. I held her anyway. Was that strength? Or denial dressed in a husband's devotion? I didn't have the heart to accuse her. Not because I trusted her blindly, but because I was afraid of what the truth would do to me. To us. I thought love could outlast suspicion, that if I gave her enough space, she'd come back to me emotionally. But space is funny. Sometimes you give someone space, and they move out emotionally, piece by piece, until they're gone, and you're just holding a memory. And that's what I had been doing for months. Holding a ghost who still lived in my house. We had a daughter, 4 years old, bright eyes like her mom, but curious like me. She'd ask the questions I didn't have the courage to. One night, after her mom had cried herself to sleep beside me, my daughter tiptoed into the bedroom, climbed into our bed, and whispered, "Why does Mommy cry when she thinks we're sleeping?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "Sometimes grown-ups get sad, sweetheart, but it's not your fault." She looked at me like she knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. Kids have that radar. They can sense when things don't add up. She didn't press me, though, just curled up beside her mother, who was already deep in some dream or nightmare I'd never be part of. In the mornings, she'd act like nothing happened. Make pancakes, hum a tune, ask about our weekend plans. She was brilliant at pretending. So brilliant that for a while, I convinced myself that maybe I was the one imagining things. But then I saw the receipt. It was buried in her coat pocket when I was hanging it up. A hotel charge from 2 weeks ago. Midday. A Wednesday. She told me she was working remotely that day, doing client calls from home. My hand trembled holding that slip of paper. It was a small thing, a printed line on thermal paper, but it burned through me like a wildfire. And that night, when she cried again, I didn't hold her. I stared at the ceiling and counted every lie I'd chosen not to see. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I folded the receipt and placed it back where I found it. Why? Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd lie to me again, knowing she had already crossed that line. The next day, I took our daughter to school and came home early. I sat in the living room, lights off, phone on silent. I knew her schedule. She wasn't expecting me. And sure enough, a few minutes past noon, I heard the door. She walked in, heels clicking lightly on the hardwood, humming. She didn't notice me at first. Went straight to the bedroom. I waited. Then I walked in quietly. She turned, startled. "You're home?" she asked. I nodded. Took the afternoon off. There was a pause, a small crack in the script she always performed. "How was the client meeting?" I asked slowly. She blinked, just once, and then the lie flowed as easily as breath. It ran long. Traffic was a mess. I just got back. That was the moment. The fracture where everything I believed snapped silently. I didn't show anger. I just looked at her. Really looked. And I realized I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me anymore. She had mastered the art of crying, of deflecting, of surviving in parallel worlds. And I was just a character in one of them. A placeholder in a life she didn't want anymore. I started paying attention, not to what she said, but to what she didn't. There was a rhythm to her absences, a pattern in her excuses. Monday lunches, Wednesday strategy sessions, Friday happy hours that ended too late for someone who never used to drink. I never followed her. I didn't need to. The truth was already trailing behind her like a scent. And besides, I wasn't looking for confirmation anymore. I was looking for closure. One evening, our daughter came home with a crayon drawing. It was of our family, me, her, and her mother, and another man. He had glasses, a tie, and he was holding Mommy's hand. I asked her gently, "Who's this?" She beamed, "That's Mr. Caleb. Mommy says he's really smart and funny. We had ice cream with him." I nodded, smiled like I wasn't dying inside. Later that night, when my wife asked if I'd seen the drawing, I just said, "Yeah, cute." She laughed, said our daughter had an overactive imagination. That night, she didn't cry. She slept soundly beside me, and for the first time, I didn't envy her peace, because I had made a decision. I wasn't going to scream, or accuse, or chase. I was going to leave her exactly as she was, wrapped in the comfort of her lie, until the day the truth knocked on her door, wearing my name. I started journaling everything, not for evidence, but for myself, my sanity. I needed to pour out the silence she left in me somewhere. Every hotel charge, every late-night text she shielded from view. Every time she mentioned Caleb with that flicker in her eyes, like he understood her in ways I never could. But mostly, I wrote about the small things I missed. Her laugh, unguarded. The way she used to sit cross-legged on the couch and talk about books she never had time to read anymore. The way she used to touch my hand in the car at red lights. They were gone, vanished, like someone had hit delete on the woman I married. One afternoon, I picked up our daughter early from daycare, took her to the park. She was giggling, climbing the jungle gym, when she suddenly said, "Mommy says we might move to a new house one day, but you won't come." I felt the breath leave my lungs. I asked gently, "Did Mommy say that exactly?" She nodded. She said it might just be her and me and Mr. Caleb if Daddy gets too busy all the time. Busy? That's what I was to her now, a schedule conflict, a placeholder she was preparing to erase. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise, staring at the cold cup of coffee I never drank, because something in me had shifted. I was no longer afraid of losing her. I was afraid of losing myself. In the days that followed, I watched her closely, but not with suspicion anymore, with distance, like someone watching the tide go out for the last time. She moved through the house with casual grace, humming while she folded laundry, scrolling her phone with a half smile that used to be for me. One night, she asked if we could have dinner alone. Just us, like old times. I said yes. We went to the same restaurant we celebrated our 3rd anniversary in. She wore the navy dress I once told her made her look like a dream. Over wine, she talked about work, about how Caleb had just gotten promoted, how he might be moving to another city for an even bigger role, how things might shift. I looked at her across the candlelight and realized I was witnessing a goodbye disguised as a casual dinner. She was prepping me, softening the blow. She thought I'd cry, maybe beg. Instead, I raised my glass. "To your next chapter," I said. She blinked, smiled. But her eyes searched mine like she didn't recognize the man sitting across from her. And she was right. I wasn't the same man anymore. I was someone who had mourned a marriage in silence. And now I was ready to bury it properly, with grace and with fire. The next morning, I began the process. Not revenge, not sabotage, just detachment. I opened a new bank account, quietly moved a portion of my salary there. I contacted a lawyer, not for a fight, but for guidance. I asked about joint custody, about protecting my daughter's emotional well-being. I didn't mention infidelity. Not yet. My lawyer was calm, efficient. She'd seen it all before. Her advice was simple. Document everything. Stay composed. Let her make the next move. So I did. I kept playing the role. Husband, father. I kissed our daughter goodnight and packed her lunches. I nodded at my wife's stories about her job, even the ones I knew were stitched with lies. Then one night, I saw Caleb. He didn't see me, but I saw them on the sidewalk outside a downtown cafe. She was laughing, touching his arm. He leaned in and kissed her forehead like they'd been doing this for years. And maybe they had. I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I just walked back to my car, turned on the engine, and let the air conditioner hum louder than my thoughts. Because at that moment, I understood something. This wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the end of a performance. And I was finally ready to step off the stage. It was a Tuesday when she finally said it. Over breakfast, between sips of coffee and glances at her phone, she cleared her throat and said, "I think we need to talk." I nodded. Okay. She blinked, thrown off maybe. She expected resistance, a storm. I think I've changed. We've changed. I let her speak, let her lay out the script she had rehearsed in her head for months. Words like distance, growth, needing space, fell like petals from a wilted flower. She never mentioned Caleb. Not once. She was rewriting the story with soft edges, making herself the hero of her own escape. When she finished, I asked, "Is there someone else?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's just me. I need to find myself." I smiled gently. "Then I hope you find peace." She blinked again. That wasn't the response she rehearsed for. I stood, kissed the top of her head, and walked our daughter to school. The air outside was crisp. The world, somehow, felt lighter. Because I wasn't just letting her go. I was letting go of the version of myself that needed to be chosen. And in doing so, I chose myself for the first time in years. We separated quietly. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just paperwork, soft explanations to friends, and careful schedules for our daughter. She moved into a condo across town. Caleb was never mentioned, but I knew. And maybe she knew I knew. But we danced around it with practiced grace. I redecorated the house, not to erase her, but to reclaim the space. I painted the bedroom a new color, changed the curtains, bought new plates that didn't hold memories. Our daughter adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are resilient like that. One night she asked, "Is Mommy happy now?" I said, "I think so." She thought for a moment, then said, "You seem happier too." And she wasn't wrong. I had started writing again, real writing. Not just journals, short stories, essays, things that felt like me. I saw friends I hadn't made time for, laughed at movies I used to watch alone, cooked new meals, even if they turned out terrible. And one night, sitting on the back porch under a sky full of stars, I realized something. She had taken the life we built. But I had taken back my soul. And I liked who I was becoming more than the man I'd been pretending to be. Months passed. We settled into our new rhythm, shared custody, polite texts, separate lives. One evening, I dropped our daughter off at her mother's place. Caleb answered the door. He looked surprised, polite, extended a hand. "Hey, I've heard a lot about you." I shook his hand, firm, calm. Behind him, my ex appeared, slightly flustered. "Thanks for dropping her off. We'll see you Sunday." I nodded, bent down, kissed my daughter's forehead, then turned to leave. At the elevator, Caleb followed me. "Can I say something?" he asked. I raised an eyebrow. "She talks about you a lot," he said. "More than she probably should. I don't think she's over you." I didn't flinch. "Then that's something you two will have to figure out." The elevator dinged. I stepped inside, and as the doors closed, I saw a flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not jealousy. Doubt. It was never about winning her back. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed to. And in that moment, I felt the deepest peace I had known since before it all began. It wasn't a grand epiphany. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly made sense. It was slower, quieter, like the tide pulling back just enough to see the rocks underneath. I began rebuilding, not a new life, but a truer one. I took our daughter on weekend hikes, started therapy, joined a writing group that met every Thursday night. They didn't know my past, just my words. It was liberating. Sometimes I'd see couples holding hands and feel a sting. Other times, I'd feel nothing at all. Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. It loops, dips, surprises you. My ex sent a text one evening. "Thank you for never making this ugly." I stared at it for a while before replying, "It was never about you. because it wasn't, not anymore. I had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for mine. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain, and that took time. 1 year later, almost to the day, I published my first essay. It was called The Man I Had to Become. It wasn't about her. It wasn't even about the affair. It was about grief, reclamation, the quiet way a man rebuilds after being broken, not by betrayal, but by silence. The response was overwhelming. Emails from strangers, messages from men and women who said, "I thought I was the only one." I realized then what happened to me wasn't rare, but speaking about it with clarity, without bitterness, that was. One night, I got a message from her. "I read your essay. It was beautiful, honest, painful." I typed back, "Thank you." And that was it. No reunion, no long conversation, just an acknowledgement. We had both moved on, but in very different ways. And as I tucked my daughter into bed that night, she smiled and whispered, "You're my favorite person in the world." In that moment, I knew. I didn't just survive the storm. I became the man who could dance in its aftermath. Some stories end with a bang, others with a whisper. Mine ended with a choice: to stop clinging to a love that no longer served me, and to begin building a life rooted in honesty, in presence, in peace. To anyone out there carrying the weight of betrayal, I say this: you don't have to set fire to their world to reclaim your own. Sometimes, the quietest revenge is simply becoming someone they can no longer reach. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if you saw yourself in any part of it, I invite you to share it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. You never know who might need these words next, because healing isn't loud, but it is contagious.